There's a part of you that you don't see, a hidden force that shapes your thoughts, your decisions, and your life itself. And until you face it, it will control you. What if I told you that your biggest struggles, procrastination, insecurity, self-doubt, aren't random? What they're signals, messages from a part of you that you've been avoiding? A part of you that has been watching, waiting for the moment you'd finally pay attention. This is not just psychology. This is not self-help fluff. This is the very foundation of your reality. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. Today, we're going on a journey into the hidden depths of your mind. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. Because true power, true self-mastery, begins when you stop running from your shadow and start embracing it. Now that we've opened the door, let's step inside. You see, the shadow is not just an idea. It's not just a theory or a metaphor. It's real. It's alive. And whether you acknowledge it or not, it's shaping your life in ways you can't even imagine. The shadow is the part of you that you do not wish to see. The part that you have rejected, hidden and buried deep beneath. It is made up of everything you have been taught is unacceptable. Your anger, your jealousy, your selfishness, your sadness. But here's where it gets interesting. Your shadow is not just made of things you call bad. It also contains things you've been taught to believe are bad. Things that, in reality, might be your greatest strengths. Hidden inside your shadow could be your confidence, your ambition, your creativity. And because you have buried these parts of yourself, you now live in conflict. You move through life feeling like something is missing, like something inside you is fighting to be seen. But how to get there? You are not born ashamed of yourself. You were not born afraid of your own power. As a child, you were raw, unfiltered potential. You expressed freely, without hesitation. If you were angry, you showed it. If you were joyful, you embraced it. If you had an idea, you shared it. But then something happened. Little by little, piece by piece, you were conditioned. Don't be so loud. Stop crying. That's weak. You shouldn't brag about yourself. Nice people don't get angry. Every time you heard these words, you made a silent decision. You took that part of yourself, your boldness, your emotions, your assertiveness, your gifts, and you pushed it into the darkness. Because to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe, you had to fit in. And so, you created a version of yourself that was acceptable. A version that smiled when it wanted to scream. That stayed quiet when it wanted to speak. That shrunk itself down, hoping to never be too much. That version, the mask, became the you that the world sees. But what happens to everything you hid away? It doesn't disappear. It waits. And when you least expect it, it shows itself. Imagine someone who was told, from a young age, that being assertive was rude. Maybe they were punished for speaking their mind. Maybe they saw their parents avoid conflict at all costs. So, they learned to suppress their voice. They avoid confrontation. They become agreeable, always prioritizing what others want. But here's the problem. Deep inside, they still have needs, desires, opinions. And because they never learned how to express them in a healthy way, their shadow finds another way to release that energy. Maybe it comes out as passive aggressiveness. Maybe they explode in anger over something small, shocking even themselves. Maybe they constantly attract people who walk all over them, reinforcing the belief that they don't deserve to be heard. Do you see it now? Your shadow does not disappear just because you ignore it. It controls you from the background. Your procrastination, your unexplained outbursts, your self-sabotage, these are not random. They're the shadow trying to get your attention. Because the parts of you that you have rejected are demanding to be reclaimed. But here's where everything changes. Because the shadow is not just your fears, your wounds, your suppressed emotions. It is also your hidden strengths. Think back to your childhood. Was there something you loved, something you were drawn to, that was discouraged? Maybe you love drawing, but you were told that art isn't a real career. Maybe you were a natural leader, but were shamed for being too bossy. Maybe you had big dreams, but the people around you made you feel foolish for believing in them. So, you pushed those parts of yourself away. You convinced yourself they weren't important. But deep down, you know the truth. That artist? Still inside you. That leader? Still waiting. That dreamer? Still holding on. The shadow does not just hold your pain. It holds your potential. And if you are brave enough to face it, you will find the parts of yourself that you have been missing. So let me ask you, what parts of yourself have you buried? What strengths have you mistaken for weaknesses? Because the truth is, the real you, the whole you, is still there, waiting to be seen, waiting to be embraced. And if you've made it this far, that means something. It means that you're ready for something deeper. Take a moment, hit the subscribe button. Okay, let's go. Have you ever had a moment where you reacted in a way that even surprised you? Maybe you lashed out at someone you love over something small. Maybe you found yourself sabotaging an opportunity you knew was good for you. Maybe you judged someone harshly, only to later realize you were really judging yourself. Why does this happen? Why do we act in ways that seem completely against our own best interests? The answer lies in shadow, because you may not see it, but sees you. You can pretend it's not there. You can convince yourself that you have everything under control. But the shadow does not vanish simply because you choose to ignore it. No, it waits. And when the right moment comes, it makes itself known. Let's talk about projection. Projection is how the shadow hides in plain sight. It takes the parts of yourself that you refuse to face and reflects them onto the outside world. So instead of realizing, I need to work on this, you convince yourself that they are the problem. But here's the real danger. When you deny your shadow, it doesn't just sit quietly in a corner. It acts out. It finds another way to express itself. You suppress your anger, and suddenly, you explode over something trivial. You deny your sadness and wonder why nothing excites you anymore. You push away your true desires and find yourself living a life that feels empty, meaningless. You see, emotions don't disappear when they are ignored. They transform. They mutate. They turn into self-sabotage. They turn into addiction, chasing distractions, scrolling endlessly, drinking, smoking, consuming whatever numbs the discomfort. They turn into anxiety because deep down, you know there's something you're running from. They turn into depression because when you reject your shadow, you reject a part of yourself. And when you reject a part of yourself, you slowly lose your sense of who you even are. Think about that. How many of your struggles, your fears, your failures are not the result of external circumstances, but of something inside you, fighting to be seen? Let's get deeper. Imagine you have a dam holding back a massive body of water. That water represents every unspoken emotion, every buried truth, every part of yourself that you've locked away. At first, the dam holds strong. You go about your life, believing that if you just push these feelings far enough down, they will stay there forever. But they don't. The pressure builds. Cracks begin to form. And then, one day, the dam bursts. Not in a slow, controlled release, but in a sudden, chaotic flood. This is what happens when the shadow is ignored. The emotions you refuse to deal with now overwhelm you. The anger you suppressed turns into uncontrollable rage. The sadness you denied turns into despair. The truth you ran from turns into regret. And at that moment, you realize the things you spent your whole life avoiding were not just inconveniences. They were parts of you. And by rejecting them, you rejected yourself. But what if you had faced them earlier? What if, instead of waiting for the explosion, you had learned to work with your shadow, to release the pressure in small, intentional ways? How different would your life look? Now, if the shadow exists within individuals, what happens when an entire society denies its darkness? History has already given us the answer. Think of any major injustice. Any time a nation has painted itself as the hero while committing acts of violence, cruelty, or oppression. How is this possible? Because societies, just like individuals, create shadows. They rewrite history to avoid guilt. They place blame on outsiders rather than looking inward. They demonize the other instead of confronting their own flaws. A country that claims to stand for freedom, yet silences dissent. A culture that shames certain behaviors in public while indulging in them in secret. A system that punishes the weak while the powerful go unchecked. The shadow is not just personal, it is collective. And just as individuals must confront their darkness, so must societies. Because ignoring it does not make it go away. It only makes it stronger. So let me ask you now, what have you been running from? What have you buried so deep that you've convinced yourself it no longer exists? Now that we understand the shadow, how it controls us personally, the question remains, what do we do about it? How do we stop being prisoners of our unconscious mind and finally step into mastery? The answer lies in integration, the process of bringing the shadow into the light, making peace with it, and transforming it into a source of power rather than destruction. And to do this, there are 5 essential principles according to Carl Jung. 1. Recognizing the shadow. The first step, the most critical step, is to see the shadow. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. But how do you recognize something that has been hidden from you your entire life? Simple. Pay attention. Every time you experience an intense emotional reaction, your shadow is speaking. Think about it. What triggers your anger? What makes you deeply insecure? What kinds of people irritate you the most? The shadow reveals itself in your projections, the way you judge and condemn others for the very things you secretly struggle with. The shadow hides in the traits we reject in others. So if you want to find your shadow, start there. Ask yourself, what do I criticize in others? What behaviors do I find unacceptable? And is it possible that I reject those things in myself? 2. Owning the shadow. Once you've seen the shadow, you must own it. And this is where most people fail. Because taking ownership of the shadow means taking responsibility. No more blaming your past. No more blaming society. No more blaming the world for why you are the way you are. It means admitting that the fears, the insecurities, the suppressed emotions, they are yours. But here's the secret. The moment you take responsibility, the shadow loses its power over you. Because what you own cannot own you. Now, this is not about shaming yourself. It's not about saying, oh, I'm a terrible person for having these traits. No, owning the shadow means saying, yes, I have darkness within me, but that does not make me weak. It makes me whole. A practical way to do this? Journaling. Take a moment. Write down situations where you've projected your shadow onto others. Ask yourself, what was I really feeling in those moments? What part of myself was I rejecting? How can I start to accept that part of me instead of fighting it? 3. Communicating with the shadow. The shadow isn't just something that hides in your mind. It's something that speaks. But most people never listen. They distract themselves. They drown it out with noise, with social media, with work, with entertainment, anything to avoid silence. But if you truly want to integrate your shadow, you need to create space to hear it. How? Through dreams, through meditation, through stillness. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mind speaks through symbols, and a shadow often appears as a dark figure of the same sex as you. So instead of fearing it, ask yourself, what part of myself have I been avoiding? What does it want me to see? Another way to communicate with the shadow is self-inquiry. Sit in silence. Ask yourself a question. What am I afraid to admit about myself? What truth am I running from? What would happen if I stopped running? And then just listen. 4. Transforming the shadow. Now, let's be clear, integrating the shadow doesn't mean letting your worst traits take over. It means learning how to channel them into something powerful. Think about it. Anger, when left unchecked, leads to destruction. But anger, when harnessed, becomes passion, the fuel that drives change. Envy, when repressed, turns into bitterness. But envy, when understood, becomes motivation, a clue to what you truly desire in life. Fear, when denied, leads to paralysis. But fear, when faced, becomes courage, a force that pushes you beyond your limits. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is raw energy. And when you learn to transform it, it becomes your greatest strength. So ask yourself, how can I turn my negative emotions into fuel for growth? The answer to your power lies in the very things you've been afraid to face. 5. Making shadow work a lifelong habit. And finally, shadow work isn't something you do once and then forget about. It's not a one-time revelation. It's a lifelong process. Why? Because as you grow, new shadows emerge. You will always have blind spots. You will always have unconscious patterns trying to pull you back into old ways. The key to true self-mastery isn't to reach a place where you have no shadow. It's to develop the habit of facing it every time it appears. So pay attention to recurring patterns in your life. Do you keep attracting the same toxic relationships? Do you always self-sabotage when success is within reach? Do you find yourself stuck in the same emotional loops over and over again? These are signs that the shadow is still at work. And each time you recognize it, own it, communicate with it, and transform it, you take another step toward mastery. Not perfection, mastery. Because true mastery is not about eliminating darkness. It's about learning to dance with it. Most people hear the word shadow and think of something sinister, something they must fight against. But that's a misunderstanding. The shadow is not your enemy. It is not some dark force working against you. It is simply the parts of you that remain unknown. Your pain, your fears, your insecurities, but also your untapped power, your hidden strengths, your unrealized potential. The shadow is not just the darkness you suppress. It is the gold buried deep within your unconscious. And the reason so many people feel lost, stuck, or unfulfilled in life is because they've spent their whole existence running from the very thing that could make them whole. There is an ancient truth, one that has been echoed through time, from the teachings of Taoism to the philosophy of Carl Jung. Wholeness comes from integration, not rejection. Light without darkness is blinding. Darkness without light is consuming. True power is found in balance. You don't need to destroy the shadow. You need to acknowledge it, to work with it, to transform it from something that controls you into something that guides you. Because the moment you embrace the parts of yourself that you once feared, you stop being a prisoner of your own mind, and you become something else entirely. You become free. If this message resonated with you, if you're ready to begin this journey, let me know. Comment below. I'm ready. And if you found value in this, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we're only just getting started. The journey to true self-mastery begins now. Are you coming? Let's go.